One of the biggest choke points on Interstate 5, all the way from Canada down to Mexico, the biggest choke point is a bridge over the Columbia River. And the government agencies involved in that bridge on both sides of the river have talked about replacing it for the last couple of decades. The problem is they keep insisting on including a lot of other razzmatazz, including light rail, which has been voted down by voters on both sides of the river. And yet and still, those in government say, you're going to take a light rail if we have to force it on you. Oh, and then there's a second issue, and that is, should we add tolls to an interstate freeway? In general, tolls are not allowed on interstate freeways anywhere in America. If you take money from the federal government to build interstate freeways, you are generally not allowed to put tolling on those freeways unless you've agreed to expand capacity, which, as I understand the latest iterations of the Columbia River Bridge replacement, otherwise known as the IBR, they don't really enhance the capabilities of the bridge at all. You get basically the same size bridge at a multi-billion-dollar price tag. Well, John Lee follows this a whole lot closer than I do. Airline pilot, retired. John, welcome back to the program.
Lars, you teed that up perfectly. Thanks for having me on today.
Well, I do what I can. But John, let's start with some really basic stuff that I think any kid could do in a story problem. There are a lot of different pots of money that they might reach into to get the total price tag of $3.2 to $4.8 billion to build this bridge, even assuming they put in the unnecessary light rail and probably a lot of other things to make it look pretty that aren't necessarily necessary. Do they have that money available to them to replace this bridge already?
Absolutely. 2 weeks ago on Halloween, we got a very nice Halloween present. The 16 members of the bi-state legislative committee that supposedly provide oversight to this were receiving a briefing from the Interstate Bridge team, and they told them that the IBR team has identified $2.5 billion of federal money that are likely to receive.
John, you dropped out for just a moment. You said they've identified $2.5 billion of federal money toward the cost of this project.
Exactly right. And so simple math, as you said, proves we do not need tolls to pay for the interstate bridge. If you add to the $2.5 billion, $1.1 billion that the state of Washington legislature has already allocated to the project, and a $1 billion or more that the Oregon legislature is supposed to come up with to match Washington's contribution, you have at least $4.6 billion, and the high end of the cost range was $4.8 billion. Clearly, tolling money is not needed to pay for this, especially when both the high and the low end estimates, the 4.8 and the $3.2 billion, included light rail. So it is totally possible to do this, including the light rail, which nobody wants, as you noted, but without tolling.
Now, they still plan, the official plan is that they will build the bridge, spend the money, and still put tolls on the freeway, right?
Exactly right. And they come up with all sorts of reasons for, well, we are going to use variable rate tolls for congestion pricing as a financially negative incentive to encourage people to travel at other times when it's not congested, or to use mass transit, which you and I know nobody wants to use here in the Portland metro area, especially crossing the river. But the reality would be you would end up with double tolls to drive Interstate 5. One toll for the bridge and a second toll to drive on I-5 into downtown Portland. The financial reality of that is that people respond to financial pain and incentives, and it would cause a huge amount of diversion onto I-205 that would only have a single toll. And so both bridges would become congested and cause problems, and neither would solve the real problem that people want, and that's to save time. They're going to make it a nightmare.
By the way, John, this congestion pricing, this is the part I have the toughest time believing, because Washington in general is run by liberal progressives. Jay Inslee and a bunch of Democrats in Olympia, and Oregon to a large extent, and Portland are run by liberal progressives. And they'll always tell you, well, we have to look out for the least among us. Frankly, I think conservatives do a better job of that. But in this case, when they say we're going to use congestion pricing, they're talking about pricing poor people off the freeway. And if you say, well, just have them drive in at a different time. Well, the problem is, if you're a poor working person who works for wages and you make just above minimum wage, let's say, and you have to be at work at 7 in the morning or 8 in the morning, you don't have the freedom to say, by the way, boss, I think I'll show up at 10 o'clock every morning and then I'll stay till, 8 o'clock every night or 7 o'clock every night. You don't get that kind of flexibility. Upper incomes may get that kind of flexibility, but lower incomes do not. So they're basically saying to these people, you're going to have to pay, because when the boss says, I need you at work at 7:30 every morning, and you say, but boss, I have to pay 2 tolls to drive down the freeway, and my only alternative is to drive a longer distance over the 205 bridge and pay 1 toll, that's all going to come out of your pocket, and you don't have any flexibility, do you?
No, you're exactly right. It is going to harm the low-income, hardworking, poor family the most, that the Democrats say they allegedly care about, but in reality, they're going to hurt them the most. Another interesting aspect of this, in this whole feel-good sales pitch, is they say, well, we want to provide a low-income tolling program, a set of reduced rate tolls or free tolls for those poor families. Well, think about it. For every single free or severely reduced toll package that they offer, that person no longer has the incentive to drive at a different time or to take transit. But when they get on the road, because it's the variable rate congestion pricing, they're going to drive up the price for everybody else that's paying the tolls, because the congestion will increase. And it's just an insane program that ultimately is hugely inefficient. In 2021, 68% of the tolls collected in Seattle's I-405 and SR-167 system went to the cost of collection. Nobody in their right mind would ever use a credit card as a private business person, that the cost to use that cost you 68% of your revenues. It's insane.
I agree with you. And John, at some point, we've got to talk about whether or not we ever get to put Lightrail to a vote again, because I know to a fair certainty what the voters would say about spending $1 billion or $1.3 billion to put Lightrail on when they don't want it to begin with.